All right, so um, today let's dive into something that I think is pretty relevant these days.
Yeah.
Classroom conversations, right? On those topics that can, you know, quickly become pretty heated.
Yeah.
Things like, race, religion, current events,
Yeah.
things that make people want to argue, not necessarily discuss.
Hmm.
And honestly, this isn't just for teachers, is it? I mean, we all face these kinds of conversations, whether we're at home, with family, with
Yes.
friends, in the workplace.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really about, just that preparedness to enter into a conversation and know what to expect and how to navigate it.
Right, and it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's kind of inescapable these days.
It is. And what I find so fascinating is how often schools react after an incident happens.
Uh-huh.
They're putting out a fire as opposed to trying to prevent it in the first place.
So totally.
You think about that basketball game where the Roosevelt High School players hurled anti-Semitic slurs at the opposing team
Right.
from the LaFell School, which is a Jewish day school.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
It's like, wow, what can we do in advance to make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Exactly. And, it felt like a wake-up call. And honestly, a bit disheartening, especially with those statistics that we saw, like a 337% increase in anti-Semitism since last October, right?
Mhm.
Plus a surge in anti-Arab and anti-Muslim bias, too. It's like,
Yeah,
wow. Makes you wonder,
right.
how many schools are truly prepared for these conversations, even though when you look at their mission statements, they all talk about diversity and inclusion and being,
Well, and tolerance and respect.
exactly, respect.
Yeah,
But then how do you actually do that?
right. How do you actually bridge that gap between the mission and what's happening on the ground
Right,
with
right.
the students?
It's almost like they're two completely separate things.
Yes, and that's why, we're looking at the source that we have that really breaks down these 7 phases of how to navigate these conversations productively.
Okay, so let's get into those phases.
Right.
Phase 1 is preparing the content. Now, to me, that sounds like, well, duh, you should know what you're talking about.
Right.
But I'm guessing there's a little more to it than that.
Absolutely.
Like-
It is more than just knowing the content. It's about anticipating, where confusion or bias might lead the conversation astray.
Uh-huh.
Right? Like imagine discussing a historical event that's often misrepresented, so you want to be able to preemptively address some of those misunderstandings.
Well, that makes me think of how the American Civil War is taught.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so much of the nuance gets lost, and suddenly it's just about states' rights and not about slavery.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's not just about having those facts laid out, but also being able to set clear ground rules for the conversation as well.
Hmm.
And that's something I've found to be so incredibly important in any discussion, not just classrooms.
Hmm.
Those boundaries really help to create a safer space for everyone to share.
For sure. And I imagine it also helps keep things focused and productive.
Absolutely.
Especially with teenagers who, let's be honest, can get sidetracked pretty easily.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But, okay, so we want to make sure the content is there. We want to set the ground rules. But here's a question I have. How do you make sure that these conversations are actually engaging for students?
Yes.
I mean, I can remember back in the day, history lessons, I was bored to tears.
Yeah. It's about finding a way to connect to what they're interested in, what's going on in their lives right now.
Okay, how do you do that?
You could bring in something like, what's happening in current events, or a song that they like, or even a meme.
Uh-huh.
Like something that bridges that gap between the classroom and what they're actually dealing with in their world.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork.
Yes.
We've prepped the content.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the ground rules.
Yeah.
Everyone's on the same page.
Uh-huh.
Phase 2
Okay.
throws me for a loop.
Right.
Choosing the lead teachers.
Yeah.
Now, I never really thought about the teacher's role being so crucial in these conversations.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes sense when you think about it because not every teacher, no matter how knowledgeable they are,
Right.
is equipped to handle the emotional complexities of these discussions.
Oh, for sure.
Imagine someone who's incredibly passionate about a certain topic.
Uh-huh.
It might be really tough for them to stay objective in the classroom.
Oh, I can totally see that happening. Like the teacher who goes on this tangent about their favorite historical figure,
Yes,
and suddenly the whole lesson plan is out the window.
exactly.
Yeah.
So self-awareness is key. The source even suggests that teachers should have the option to recuse themselves if they don't feel equipped or comfortable leading that.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
pretty mature even for seasoned teachers, I would say.
It's about really putting the students' needs first.
Okay,
Mhm.
so it's recognizing your own limitations and knowing when to step back.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Now, the source also mentions using co-instructors with different strengths. Okay. So wouldn't that be confusing for students to have two teachers leading a discussion?
Well, it can actually be incredibly effective.
Okay.
You can think of it kind of like that good cop, bad cop dynamic, where one teacher might focus more on the content and the other one is observing the room, making sure that everyone feels heard.
Okay.
And they can even switch off during the discussion to keep it engaging.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like having built-in support, right, to keep things on track.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also thinking back to that basketball game incident, right?
Mm-hmm.
Age and background, those must have played a role there. Teenagers
For sure.
can make assumptions about adults, and I think that can impact these conversations.
Absolutely. Those assumptions can create this extra layer of complexity to an already challenging conversation.
Right.
And it really highlights the importance of being able to address those assumptions, both for the teacher and for the students, which leads us to phase 3, preparing the students for these discussions.
Now, this is where we shift the focus.
Right.
It's not just about the teacher anymore. It's about equipping the students with the right tools.
Exactly. It might seem obvious, but we can't just assume that kids automatically know how to disagree respectfully or even understand, why it's important to listen to different viewpoints.
It's like learning any skill, right? You need instruction and practice.
Exactly.
What kind of ground rules are we talking about here?
Okay.
I'm imagining the usual no interrupting, respect others' opinions, that kind of thing.
Those are all important, but this source goes a little deeper.
Okay.
They really recommend explicitly teaching phrases for a respectful disagreement. Like, I see your point, however.
Okay.
Things like that, to be able to give students the language to actually express dissent in a way that is constructive.
I like that.
Yeah.
I see your point, however. It acknowledges the other person's viewpoint,
Yes.
but still allows space for a different perspective.
Right.
Teenagers often struggle to articulate themselves, right?
Yeah.
Especially when they're under pressure. So how do we ensure that these phrases become more than just words on a poster, right?
Well, the source suggests practicing with low-stakes situations first.
Okay.
Imagine a scenario where a student sees someone cheating on a test.
Uh-huh.
Not a huge moral dilemma, but it allows them to practice using those phrases in a safe environment.
So it's like building up their conversational muscles
Right.
before they hit the weight room
Exactly.
of a truly challenging conversation.
Yes.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what comes next?
Phase 4 focuses on advanced organizers, which I know sounds very academic and formal.
Yeah, when I was in school, advanced organizers just meant read chapter 5.
Right.
Like that was it.
Exactly. But this is different. This is about prepping students for the process of the conversation, not just the content itself. So one suggestion that they have is to have students read primary sources with diverse viewpoints and practice disagreeing with those authors beforehand.
Whoa, so they're literally practicing disagreeing before the main event.
Yes. It's this safe space for them to try out those phrases, to get comfortable with expressing dissent, and also to understand how different people can interpret the same information.
Oh, that's pretty clever.
Yeah.
It's like taking role-playing to a whole new level.
Yeah, it's true.
It also seems like the kind of thing that parents might have opinions about, especially in today's climate.
And the source does emphasize the importance of parental outreach, both for transparency and to just reiterate that the goal isn't to indoctrinate students, but it's about critical thinking skills.
Okay, but you're right, navigating that communication with parents can be tricky.
Oh, absolutely. It's a whole other
episode right there.
For sure.
Okay, so we've got the content prepped, teachers are selected, students are practicing.
Yes.
What happens when we actually get to the discussion itself?
All right, so then phases 5 and 6 are all about those in-lesson guidelines and strategies, basically putting all that prep work into action.
Okay, let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
What are some key takeaways from those two phases?
Well, so phase 5 really focuses on setting clear guidelines as the lesson is introduced, basically reiterating those goals and expectations for the discussion and making sure those ground rules and those respectful disagreement phrases are front and center.
So it's like, okay, everyone, remember what we talked about.
Yes.
Now let's put it into practice.
Exactly. And it's also just really crucial for the teacher to emphasize that all voices will be heard and respected no matter what. You're creating a space where everyone feels safe to share,
Right.
even if their view is different from the majority.
And I can see how that can make or break the whole conversation, right?
Absolutely.
If someone feels like they're going to be shut down,
Yeah.
immediately they're not going to share.
They're not going to participate.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so then what about phase 6?
Okay, so phase 6 is really all about those in-lesson strategies. And this is where the teacher shifts from being a content expert to really a facilitator.
Okay.
They're managing the flow of the conversation, correcting misinformation when it comes up, and most importantly, they're modeling good behavior.
That makes me think of those teachers that lead with a really heavy hand, right?
Yeah.
Just shut down any opinions that don't align with their own.
Yeah.
That can totally kill a conversation.
It can, and that's the opposite of what we want.
Right.
We really want to guide the students, not dictate to them. And so the source talks about using different grouping strategies to encourage participation. Things like think pair share or small group discussions to help those students that might not feel as comfortable speaking up in a large group.
Right, because not everyone thrives in that raise your hand and share
Exactly.
kind of environment.
Right. Some people need that space to process before they jump in.
Okay, so now here's the thing. Sometimes, despite all of this prep work, these discussions, they go off the rails.
Oh, yeah.
And that's actually something I think we should spend some time discussing because it's inevitable.
It's going to happen.
Yeah, even with the best of intentions.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
So how do you handle those moments?
Okay.
When things get heated, when maybe personal attacks start flying, when one student tries to dominate the conversation?
Right. That's where having those clear strategies in place is so important. And luckily, the source really lays out some practical tips and advice.
Okay, like what?
You know, things like knowing when to just defer the discussion if things are getting too heated, or how to address inappropriate language directly, or even redirect those students who might be trying to monopolize the conversation without shutting them down completely.
Okay, so I'm hooked.
Yeah.
Let's dive into those strategies in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, sounds good.
Because, let's be honest, I think those are the moments that make or break these conversations, right?
Well, they really are. And learning how to navigate those moments is so essential, not just for teachers, but for anyone who wants to have, you know,
Right, exactly.
productive and meaningful conversations in any setting, really.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's take a quick break.
Right.
And we'll come back and talk about how to do damage control
Sounds good.
when those conversations go off the rails.
Okay. It's true. You know those moments when a discussion goes off the rails? It can feel like a train wreck.
Oh, totally.
But having a plan in place can really make all the difference.
Okay, so let's talk damage control.
Okay.
What are some of the biggest red flags that a conversation is heading for trouble?
All right.
I'm imagining things like personal attacks, disrespectful language, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. When the focus shifts from the ideas to the individuals, that's a huge warning sign.
Okay.
Same thing when the language becomes, you know, inappropriate or offensive. Those are really clear cues for the teacher to step in.
Makes sense. But how do you do that without making the situation worse?
Right.
Especially with teenagers who can be, shall we say, sensitive to authority figures stepping in?
It's definitely a delicate balance.
Yeah.
You know, the source suggests a few different approaches.
Okay.
Sometimes simply deferring the discussion is best, especially if emotions are running high. It acknowledges the tension without forcing a resolution when everyone is, you know, fired up.
So it's like hitting the pause button on an argument before it escalates.
Exactly.
Gives everyone a chance to cool down, come back with a clearer head.
Right, regroup.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to address the problematic behavior directly. Ignoring offensive comments, even if they're, you know, disguised as just joking,
Right.
creates a hostile environment, and the source is very clear on that point.
Right. Silence can be interpreted as agreement or acceptance. But how do you call out bad behavior without making the student feel like they're being attacked?
Well, it's all about separating the behavior from the person.
Okay.
So instead of saying, you know, you're being disrespectful, you could say something like, that language is not appropriate for our classroom. It really focuses on the action, not the individual.
That's a good distinction. It keeps the focus on maintaining a respectful space for everybody.
Exactly.
What about those students who, despite all the ground rules, try to dominate the conversation?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure every teacher has encountered that at some point.
Absolutely. The discussion monopolizers, as the source calls them.
Love that.
Sometimes a simple, let's hear from someone else is enough. But, you know, if that fails, setting those clear parameters can be helpful.
Okay.
Like, you can share one thought, and then we'll hear from someone else.
It's like that old improv rule.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, right.
Right.
Acknowledge their contribution,
Right.
but bring others into the conversation. Okay, speaking of improv, sometimes these discussions take these unexpected turns.
Oh, yeah.
What happens when a student brings up a completely unrelated topic?
Okay.
Think back to that basketball game.
Mm-hmm.
What if the conversation veered into the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Oh, wow. That's when the teacher's judgment really comes in.
Yeah.
Acknowledging the student's point is crucial, even if it is off topic.
Okay.
But then you have a choice.
Mm.
Do you engage with the new topic, or do you gently steer things back on course?
So it's a choose-your-own-adventure moment for the teacher.
It is, and I imagine the teacher's own comfort level with the topic is going to play a role there, too.
Totally. Yeah, if it's something that they're not comfortable with or that they feel like is beyond the scope of, their expertise, then...
Absolutely. And sometimes, honestly, the best move is to just acknowledge it and say, that's a great point, we can discuss it later.
Right.
You're showing respect for that student while also maintaining the flow of the lesson.
Okay. It's all about picking your battles.
Right. It is, yeah.
Okay, now here's a tricky one.
Okay.
What about the teacher's own views?
Right.
How much should they share, especially on these really sensitive topics?
That's a great point.
I imagine that can get pretty dicey.
It can. And the source does really dive into this, acknowledging those potential pitfalls.
Okay.
Because if you're sharing your own views, you could be silencing students who disagree.
Right.
Or you could be creating that perception of indoctrination.
Right, like you're trying to push your agenda on them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, if you're staying completely neutral, it can also feel inauthentic.
Right, like you're holding back.
Yeah, it's like you're this robot. You don't have any feelings about this topic.
Right.
So it's finding that balance.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is.
So what's the solution?
Well, transparency is key.
Okay.
If you do have strong feelings about a certain topic, acknowledge it up front. You can say something like, I want to be open about my views on this, but I'm committed to hearing all perspectives. It sets the stage for an honest discussion.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about modeling intellectual honesty, right?
Yes.
Showing students that it's okay to have strong opinions, but you still need to be open to hearing other viewpoints.
Absolutely. And, instead of just stating your opinion, really focus on the why behind it.
Okay.
Model that critical thinking process for them.
So it's less about this is what I think and more about this is what I think and here's why I think it.
Exactly.
It invites deeper analysis.
Mm-hmm.
It encourages students to think critically about their own beliefs.
Yes.
So we've done all this prep work.
We have.
We've had the discussion, hopefully navigated those tricky moments.
Right.
Now we get to phase 7, right?
Yes, the post-discussion wrap-up.
Okay, the post-discussion wrap-up.
And this is where all that prep work really pays off.
Ah, yes. Because the learning doesn't just end when the discussion does.
Yeah.
What are some key elements of a successful post-discussion wrap-up?
Okay, well, summarizing the key points is crucial.
Okay.
You want to make sure that everyone's leaving with the same understanding of what was discussed.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just about the content. It's about reflecting on the process as well.
Okay.
Did students follow those ground rules? Did they use those respectful disagreement phrases?
So it's like giving feedback on their participation, not just their answers.
Exactly. And that's where those post-discussion survey questions can really be gold.
Oh, yeah. I love those.
Yeah.
Like what?
Remember the one that asks about how comfortable students felt participating? That can reveal so much about the classroom dynamic.
Right. Like if multiple students said they felt uncomfortable sharing, that might signal a need to revisit those ground rules or create smaller groups.
Absolutely.
It's valuable feedback for the teacher.
It is. And another one that I really love is that question about what did you learn from someone else today that you wouldn't have thought of on your own?
Oh, I like that one.
Yeah, it highlights the power of diverse perspectives. And it encourages students to really listen to each other.
It's about valuing those aha moments when someone's view actually shifts.
Yes.
Because of what they heard from a classmate.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the mark of a truly successful discussion.
Agreed. It's recognizing that learning is a collaborative process.
Yeah.
And honestly, this approach, this focus on preparation and respectful disagreement, it's valuable far beyond just the classroom.
Oh, absolutely. Think about workplaces, families, even online discussions. I mean, these skills are essential for navigating any situation where different opinions are going to collide.
Exactly. It's about building bridges, not walls, even when disagreements arise.
Beautiful.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I'd love to hear your thoughts. What stands out to you as like the most valuable takeaway from this exploration?
Well, for me, it's the realization that preparation is everything.
Yes.
It's not just about knowing the content.
Right.
It's about creating the right environment, setting clear expectations,
Yeah.
and giving both teachers and students the tools to handle those inevitable challenging moments.
It's that proactive approach
Yeah.
instead of being reactive. And it goes beyond just those formal classroom discussions.
Right.
It's about really approaching everyday interactions, those moments when we encounter different viewpoints, with that same level of intentionality and respect.
Absolutely. It's like recognizing that every interaction has the potential to be a learning experience, right? A chance to expand our understanding, to connect with others in a more meaningful way.
Beautifully said.
So I like that.
As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder.
Okay, hit me.
If you could design the ideal environment for a challenging conversation, what would it look like? What elements would be essential for fostering that respect, that understanding, that meaningful dialogue, even in the face of disagreement?
That is a powerful question to consider.
It is.
And for more insightful deep dives into a variety of topics, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive.
Yes.
We'll be back soon to explore that question and more. So that question, that you left us with about what that ideal environment looks like has been swirling in my head.
I bet.
Like, it can't just be about rules and strategies, can it?
It really is deeper than that. I think for me, the foundation has to be trust.
Okay.
Without it, those conversations, they devolve into defensiveness and accusation.
Right.
It's like you're trying to build a house on sand.
It's like all those online debates that you see where everyone's just shouting their opinions.
Yes.
No one's actually listening.
Right. There's no trust there.
Yeah?
It's just point scoring.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you build trust in a conversation like this?
Well, it takes time.
Yeah.
It takes vulnerability. It means acknowledging our own biases and really listening to understand, not just to reply.
So it's about moving beyond those surface level exchanges and really connecting on a human level, even when we disagree.
Yes, absolutely.
But that can be hard.
It is.
Especially when you're talking about really sensitive topics.
Yeah, it means being willing to sit with discomfort.
Okay.
Those viewpoints that really challenge us, those are the ones we need to lean into, not shut down.
Instead of just immediately thinking, that's wrong.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, okay, well, why do they see it that way?
Yes, it's about approaching it with curiosity, not judgment.
And that curiosity ties into another element, I think, which is this shared commitment to learning.
Absolutely.
We all have something to teach.
Yes.
And we all have something to learn.
Right, regardless of background or beliefs.
It's almost like approaching it with a beginner's mind, that sense of wonder and openness. Like, I might not agree with you, but I'm genuinely interested in understanding your perspective.
Yeah, it makes me think of that saying, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, surrounding yourself with diverse perspectives is key.
And that diversity isn't just about opinions, is it?
No.
It's about background, experience, personality.
Exactly.
I think back to those co-instructors that we were talking about, with different strengths working together.
It's about recognizing that everyone brings something unique to the table.
But creating that inclusive environment, that takes work.
It does.
You need to be really mindful of whose voices are being heard.
Yeah.
And whose voices might be missing.
Right.
And it makes me think back to that basketball game again. Were there any Jewish students on the Roosevelt team?
Right.
Did anyone speak up? We don't know.
Right.
But it highlights how crucial it is to amplify those marginalized voices, right?
Yeah, it does. And it's not just about what we say, but how we say it.
Right.
Body language, tone of voice. It all contributes to creating that space.
It sends those subtle signals.
It does.
Like, you are welcome here.
Yeah.
Your voice matters. And that's powerful stuff.
Powerful stuff.
Okay, so we're building trust. We're being curious.
Yes.
We're creating this inclusive environment. Here's something that's really hard.
Okay.
But I think so crucial.
Right.
Being willing to be wrong.
Oh, yes.
To admit when you've made a mistake.
Yeah.
To change your mind when you're presented with new information.
Especially when we're so invested in our own opinions.
Right, it can be so hard, yeah.
It is. It's like swallowing your pride.
Yeah.
But it shows that commitment to growth and understanding.
But, sometimes the most important thing isn't necessarily about debating or proving a point. It's about listening.
Just listening.
Yeah, like sometimes just holding space for someone else's experience, offering empathy, support,
Yes. So
can be way more powerful than any argument.
it's true. It's recognizing that not every conversation needs a winner or loser.
Right.
Sometimes it's about connection, understanding, allowing those human moments to really shine through.
This whole deep dive has really been about shifting perspectives, hasn't it?
It had.
From focusing just on the content to really recognizing the importance of the process.
Yes.
The environment, the human element.
The human element, for sure.
Come a long way.
We have, and honestly, I think we've just scratched the surface of what it means to create those ideal spaces for challenging conversations.
Right.
You know, it's an ongoing journey of learning and refining our approach.
But we've laid out some valuable, I think, principles and strategies that our listeners can apply
Absolutely.
in their own lives.
Yeah.
Whether they're teachers or parents or just trying to navigate those tricky conversations online.
Exactly. And hopefully this deep dive has sparked some self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do you engage in dialogue?
Mm-hmm.
What assumptions do you bring to the table? It's that invitation to think critically and to approach these conversations with a renewed sense of purpose.
It's about recognizing the transformative power of conversation, that potential for growth,
Yes.
for connection,
Uh-huh.
for understanding, even when we disagree.
So well said. I love that.
Thank you.
So as we wrap up, I encourage you to continue exploring these ideas,
Yeah.
to experiment with different approaches,
Mm-hmm.
and discover what works best for you in creating those spaces where genuine dialogue can thrive.
It's a journey worth taking. And for more insightful deep dives into a variety of topics, be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive.
Absolutely.
Until next time.